The rain was coming down in sheets as I stared out the window of my apartment in Seattle. I'm Bastian, 44, and work as a software architect. Life, until recently, had been good. I had a beautiful wife, Isolde, a cozy home, and a job I genuinely enjoyed. We'd been married for 15 years, a milestone we celebrated just last year with a trip to Italy. Or so I thought we celebrated. Isolde worked as a marketing director for a large tech firm downtown. She was ambitious, driven, and incredibly charming. She always had been. That's what drew me to her in the first place. But lately, something had felt off. She'd been working late more often, attending conferences out of state, and generally seemed distant. I chalked it up to the pressures of her job, something I understood all too well. Then came the email. It was a Sunday morning. Isolde was still asleep, her face peaceful against the pillow. My own laptop was on the kitchen counter, and I went to check something quickly. A new email had popped up addressed to her. The sender, Killian, project lead. I didn't recognize the name, but my curiosity was piqued. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't resist. I opened it. The email was explicit. It detailed a rendezvous they'd had the previous week, a business trip to Portland that Isolde had told me was strictly professional. The words jumped off the screen, each one a dagger twisting in my gut. I felt like I'd been punched, winded, unable to breathe. I read it again, hoping it was some kind of sick joke, a phishing scam gone wrong, but it was real, horrifyingly real. I stumbled back from the counter, knocking over a stack of cookbooks. The noise startled Isolde awake. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Bastian, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. I couldn't speak. I just held up the laptop, the email glaring back at her. Her eyes widened and the color drained from her face. "Bastian," she stammered, but the words caught in her throat. "Who is Killian?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was confirmation enough. The next few hours were a blur of accusations, denials, and tears. She tried to explain, to justify her actions, but I couldn't hear it. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too fresh. She claimed it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. She said she still loved me, that she regretted everything. But I knew deep down that the trust was broken, shattered beyond repair. I spent the next few days in a daze, going through the motions at work, barely able to focus. Sleep was impossible. Food was tasteless. The world seemed to have lost its color. I told a few close friends, Torin and Emmerich, what had happened. They were supportive, offering a shoulder to cry on and a steady stream of advice, most of which I ignored. "You have to confront him, Bastian," Torin said, his voice firm. "You can't just let this go." "What good would that do?" I asked, feeling numb. "It wouldn't change anything." "Maybe not," Emmerich chimed in, "but it might give you some closure. At least you'd be standing up for yourself." I thought about it, turning the idea over in my mind. Confronting Killian wouldn't bring back what I'd lost, but it might give me a sense of control, a way to channel my anger and pain. I decided to do it. I found Killian's LinkedIn profile and tracked down his office address. He worked for the same tech firm as Isolde, just a few floors above her. The thought of them working together, seeing each other every day, made my stomach churn. The next day, I took a day off work and went downtown. I walked into the gleaming office building, my heart pounding in my chest. I told the receptionist I had an appointment with Killian and was directed to his office. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. "Come in," a voice called out. I opened the door and stepped inside. Killian was sitting at his desk, a smug look on his face. He was younger than I expected, probably in his early 30s, with slick-back hair and an expensive suit. He looked exactly like the kind of guy who would sleep with a married woman. "Can I help you?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm Bastian," I said, my voice tight. "Isolde's husband." The smug look vanished from his face, replaced by a flicker of something that might have been fear. "Oh," he said, his voice barely audible. I wasn't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't," I said, taking a step closer. "I just wanted to know why you would do this to me, to my marriage." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It just happened," he said, his eyes darting around the room. "We were working closely together, and one thing led to another. One thing led to another," I repeated, my voice rising. "You seduced my wife, and you call it one thing led to another." "Look, I'm sorry," he said, his voice pleading. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." "Sorry," I spat. Sorry isn't going to fix 15 years of my life. Sorry isn't going to put back together my broken heart. I wanted to hit him, to lash out and inflict the same pain he had inflicted on me. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. It would only make things worse. So I took a deep breath and forced myself to calm down. I just want you to know, I said, my voice low and steady, that you've destroyed something beautiful. You've taken away something that can never be replaced. And for that, I will never forgive you. I turned and walked out of his office, leaving him sitting there speechless. I didn't feel any better, but I didn't feel any worse either. I had said my piece. I had stood up for myself, and that was all I could do. The next few months were a blur of legal paperwork, financial settlements, and emotional turmoil. Isolde and I separated, and eventually we divorced. It was a painful process, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I couldn't stay with someone I couldn't trust, someone who had betrayed me so deeply. I moved out of our apartment and found a smaller place in a different neighborhood. I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself from the pain. I spent time with my friends, going to movies, concerts, and sporting events. I even tried dating, but nothing felt right. Every woman I met seemed to pale in comparison to the idealized version of Isolde I had carried in my head for so long. Then one day I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something told me I should. "Hello," I said, my voice cautious. "Bastian, it's Gwyneth," the voice on the other end said. Killian's wife. I was taken aback. I hadn't spoken to Gwyneth since the initial fallout of the affair. I knew she had been devastated by Killian's betrayal just as I had been by Isolde's. "Gwyneth," I said, surprised. "How are you? Not great," she said, her voice strained. "I was wondering if we could talk. I have something to tell you." We met for coffee the next day. Gwyneth looked tired and drawn, but there was a new strength in her eyes. She told me that after I had confronted Killian, he had become increasingly erratic and abusive. He had lost his job, his friends, and his self-respect. He had spiraled into a deep depression and had started drinking heavily. "He's a mess, Bastian," she said, her voice shaking. "And I think he's capable of anything." She then told me something that made my blood run cold. Killian had been bragging to her about how he had manipulated Isolde, how he had played on her insecurities and exploited her ambition. He had even admitted to recording their intimate encounters without her knowledge and using them as leverage to keep her in the affair. "He's a monster, Bastian," Gwyneth said, tears streaming down her face. "And I think Isolde needs to know the truth." I was stunned. I had known Killian was a scumbag, but I hadn't realized the extent of his depravity. The thought of Isolde being victimized by him, manipulated and exploited, filled me with a rage I hadn't felt before. I knew I had to do something. I had to warn Isolde about Killian's true nature. I had to protect her, even though she had hurt me so deeply. I called Isolde and asked her to meet me. She was hesitant at first, but eventually she agreed. We met at a small park near her office. She looked even more tired and drawn than Gwyneth had. The weight of the affair, the divorce, and the subsequent fallout had clearly taken its toll on her. "What do you want, Bastian?" she asked, her voice flat. I took a deep breath and told her everything Gwyneth had told me about Killian. I told her about the recordings, the manipulation, and the abuse. As I spoke, I saw the color drain from her face. Her eyes widened in horror. I can't believe it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I thought he cared about me. He doesn't care about anyone but himself," I said, my voice firm. "He's a predator, Isolde, and you're his prey." She started to cry, the tears streaming down her face. "What am I going to do?" she sobbed. "He has everything. He can ruin me." Not alone," I said, reaching out and taking her hand. "Gwyneth and I are here for you. We'll help you get through this." Together, we contacted the authorities and reported Killian's crimes. It took months of investigation, but eventually he was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including invasion of privacy, extortion, and emotional abuse. He was convicted and sentenced to several years in prison. Isolde and I never reconciled, but we did find a way to forgive each other. We realized that we had both been victims of Killian's manipulation, and we had both made mistakes. We learned to let go of the anger and resentment and move on with our lives. Gwyneth and I grew closer during the ordeal. We found solace in each other's company, sharing our experiences and supporting each other through the difficult times. We discovered that we had a lot in common, including a shared sense of humor and a love of good food. One day, after Killian's trial had ended, Gwyneth and I were walking along the waterfront, watching the ferries come and go. The sun was shining and the air was crisp and clean. "Thank you, Bastian," Gwyneth said, turning to me with a smile. "For everything. For helping Isolde, for helping me, for just being there. You would have done the same for me," I said, returning her smile. We stood there for a moment, gazing into each other's eyes, and then, without a word, we leaned in and kissed. It was a gentle kiss, full of tenderness and hope. It was the kiss of two people who had been through hell and had found their way back to each other. Life isn't perfect. Scars remain, but I'm not the same man I was a year ago. I'm stronger, wiser, and more resilient. And I've learned that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for a new beginning. And sometimes, the greatest betrayals can lead to the most unexpected blessings.